Hello, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on European Gateways to Growth. I'm Dresh Bardwa and today I'm going to talk you through some of the key questions we're asked by clients that are looking to pursue growth within Europe. So these are the typical types of questions that we're being asked by retailers and operators looking to expand across Europe. And I'm not going to dwell on each of these in turn really, but I will just touch on them as we progress through the webinar this afternoon. But essentially what we're being asked is to provide an understanding of the opportunities that are represented across Europe. We're being asked to quantify what those opportunities look like, and we're also being then asked to prioritise those opportunities. And you know, one of the additional questions is around, can we have a consistent approach, a consistent proposition within all our countries across Europe, and you know, we'll take a closer look at it if that's possible or not. So one of the tools that allows us to really understand the retail landscape across Europe is Retail Markets. Retail Markets is a CACI product, and it's essentially built up from 84,000 individual retail location points, which are then aggregated up into 10,000 retail markets or retail destinations, places where people shop. And essentially what that gives us is a consistent framework for fully understanding the retail landscape across 38 European countries. So in actual fact, not all of those 38 countries are even represented by those dots on there. I've actually reduced down the area just for conciseness. But each individual red dot there essentially represents a retail market, a destination where people shop. And what Retail Markets allows you to do is really understand the dynamics between where people live, i.e. demand zones, and where people shop, i.e. those retail market destinations, those supply points. And Retail Markets is actually a catchment gravity model, so it creates blended catchments based on the interaction between demand and supply. So here we've got the example of Dusseldorf, and you can see that the darker the shade of red, the greater the proportion of shoppers from those particular zones that shop at Dusseldorf. And you can see how that then plays out, because you've got the competing Dortmund and Cologne major destinations, which you stop the Dusseldorf catchment, you know, growing towards the east and the south. And then even within that core area where you've got, you know, the greatest penetration, or you know, that red that red colour there, you can actually see how you've got a couple of regional malls which are indicated by the purple diamonds. They're actually almost eating into that catchment. You know, they're taking away some of the flows from those zones that you'd otherwise get going to Dusseldorf Centre. And so what we've got is an understanding for all of those retail markets that are represented by the red dots there, and so we understand the quality and the provision of retail for each of those centres, and we understand the catchment in terms of, you know, the types of people that are shopping at those centres. So really, Retail Markets gives us a consistent framework to holistically understand the retail landscape across all of Europe, and that's the framework that helps us answer the types of questions that are typically posed by retailers and operators looking to both expand within European countries or within Europe, or actually enter the market for the first time. So gateway cities is a term that we've come up with really to describe the types of centres that are the locations where you would first go in. You'd wave your flag and say, you know, our brand has arrived, this is our store, these are your flagship type locations. And we've defined them as the main centre where there's a population greater than 500,000 people. So those red dots there are your gateway cities, the places that people naturally understand and know about in terms of being major shopping destinations, where brands will typically, you know, enter for the first time. And if we zoom in a bit, we can actually begin to see a bit more clearly what those locations look like and where they are. So This shows us where those gateway cities are, but really, does it offer anything more than a good property director or a good property consultant can offer in terms of actually off the top of their head, they would probably name those particular locations as places where you probably want to go if you're entering a particular country or entering across Europe, formulating a strategy around flagship stores. Those are pretty obvious places. And essentially it becomes far more interesting when we drill down and actually quantify the size of that opportunity. So, as I mentioned, retail markets gives us an understanding of the catchment, and what we can do is actually say, okay, well, within that catchment, how many shoppers are there? So in this example, we're showing the shopper population. So the greater the red circle, the greater the shopping population. And now, of course, that could be substituted out for demographics or affluence or expenditure on particular product categories or income. But here we've kept it simple and we're just looking at the shopper population. And of course what you can clearly see is that even those gateway cities represent different levels of opportunity for retailers and operators within those particular markets and across Europe. So all of a sudden you've got the ability to actually quantify those locations. So those same red circles here were just shown in a different way alphabetically, moving down that slide. But essentially what it allows you to do is say, okay, well, I intuitively know the types of locations I should be opening my stores in when I'm entering or expanding across Europe. But actually being able to have that objective, quantifiable number to support that gut instinct is what retail markets offers for these gateway cities. And of course, when you're looking at Europe as a whole and have the opportunity to actually have a consistent framework for understanding Europe, what you can then do is actually quantify the different gateway cities in terms of the opportunity that they present. So here all we've done is just sorted that in terms of the shopper population. So you can begin to actually say, okay, well, how much do each of these gateway cities represent as an opportunity based on the shopper population? Now, of course, in reality, you'd probably also consider expenditure, spending power, purchasing power, income, etc. But as a very simple demonstration of that framework, these gateway cities, if it's about the volume of people, that's a very clear indication of the types of cities you should be in, but also potentially the order in which you may well want to enter them. So that's gateway cities, and the likelihood is that you probably knew about those locations already, and you might find it fairly interesting that actually you can quantify some of that demand in a consistent framework. And there might be some in there which you might disagree with, either from personal experience or from a different viewpoint. But essentially, that consistent framework across Europe, actually understanding the gateway cities and quantifying the demand, the shopper population, etc., is something that is actually very useful as an objective viewpoint for expansion across Europe by utilizing those gateway cities. Now, quite often what happens is you enter these flag-waving locations, and then you then need to decide where can I move next. So what we've got within retail markets is a grouping system, a classification. So each of those red dots that we saw in the very first map, there's retail markets across Europe map, we've actually grouped them up into different classes. So broadly speaking, they operate from the largest through to the smallest, and we've broken them up into regional malls and factory outlet centres as well. So the gateway city definition was essentially the first two classes there, so the principal markets and the national markets, and you can see we've got the classing and then the examples of those types of locations as well. But actually, where it becomes far more interesting and potentially far more useful to have a consistent framework is when we're looking at those second-tier centres, because no property director or property agent will be able to have a consistent, unbiased view of second-tier locations across the whole of Europe. As good as they are, that's just far too much for one person to be able to do. So what we've done here is we've come up with our second-tier centre classification, and by grouping up the individual classes there. So we've got major markets and regional markets on rows 3 and 4, and then we've got some of the regional malls a little bit further down, you can see 2/3 of the way down the slide. So by aggregating up those classifications of centre, we can call those our second-tier centres. And the commonality between all these different centres is that they offer an opportunity where there's a shopper population greater than 200,000 people. So here we've got our gateway cities, and actually what becomes apparent very quickly when we have a look at our tier 2 centres is that there's a very marked difference in terms of where those opportunities lie for tier 2 centres. So given that we're looking at Europe in a consistent framework, actually you can begin to see those tier 2 centres, those locations where there's more than 200,000 people, are very much concentrated in Western Europe. Which then leads us to the natural thing around, well, actually, can I have a consistent approach to tackling Europe? Well, the short answer is no, you can't, because essentially there are different geographical elements that are at play here. Now, it may well be a case of actually you might want to tackle, in very simple terms, you might say, right, I'm going to have one strategy for Western Europe and one strategy for Eastern Europe, or you might get slightly more sophisticated and say, you know what, I'm going to go down the traditional route of Iberia, Scandinavia, Benelux, UK and Ireland, you know, as pockets within Europe. So essentially, the strategy that you can employ when you're looking at Europe as a single market, it definitely does need to vary. Now, whether it needs to vary on a country-by-country basis, probably not, but you do need a slightly different proposition, a slightly different route to market for different countries within the Europe when you're looking at it in a single view. So if we take a closer look at some of those opportunities here, we've just taken those tier 2 centres and gateway cities and begin to quantify, well, actually, if you had a store in each of those different location types, what would be the shopper population that you could reach? And you know, it's very clear from that. If you look at some of the countries along the bottom axis there, you can actually see, you know, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands. These are your traditional Western European countries, which actually offer the greatest opportunities for growth if you're entering Europe for the first time, or even expanding within those countries themselves. And it is probably reflective of how mature those retail markets are. Now, clearly there is a difference, and you can't have a consistent strategy for Europe. So let's take a look at what you can be doing. So if we take the example of Germany here, we saw in the previous slide that we've got 69 centres which are classified as gateway cities and tier 2 centres. And Germany has a population of around about 80 million. And if we then take Poland as a contrasting example, with half the population, so or thereabouts, 39 million people, and there are only 6 centres which are classified as tier 2 centres and gateway cities. So I've just taken these two countries as an example of the different types of strategies that might need to be employed, you know, and more so because they're next to each other, so it's easy to demonstrate those differences as much as anything else. So if we take a closer look, we just zoom in there and see, okay, well, actually we can see where those gateway cities are, where those tier 2 centres are, and you can actually begin to see what the geographical distribution of those centre types are. So if we do take a closer look at those locations, we've got those 69 centres within Germany that we saw earlier as gateway cities and tier 2 centres, and actually they offer the opportunity to reach 1/3 or actually 30% of the total population, or thereabouts. Interestingly, if we took the same approach for Poland, so we say, okay, we want 69 locations, and we take the 69 largest locations, you'd also reach about 30% of the overall Polish population. So by that measure, 69 stores gets you 30% of the population in Germany and Poland. which makes them look reasonably similar. But of course, the obvious thing there that we've not considered is that Germany actually has a far greater population in absolute volume terms than Poland. So those 69 stores there would get you approximately 25 million people, million shoppers, compared to Poland where you get approximately 11 million shoppers with those same 69 stores. And of course, we're taking a very simplistic view there to demonstrate the differences and how the strategy will need to differ, because naturally you would include other elements such as purchasing power and household income and expenditure on particular product types, etc. So that gives you an indication of the types of how your strategy may well need to differ when you're trying to look at Europe in a consistent way. Now, of course, it goes one step beyond that as well. So in this example with Germany and Poland, what we can do is actually we can take all of those 69 markets that represent tier 2 centres and gateway cities and actually say, okay, well, if I look at those classes, I can actually see, okay, regional markets, major markets, national markets, regional malls, they're all reasonably similar. So I can, as a retailer or operator within Germany, looking at those types of locations, you can probably have a fairly consistent format, a fairly consistent store size, a fairly consistent proposition. So it makes for an easier opportunity to pursue by actually looking at Germany in that way. Now, as I mentioned, that was, those 69 stores would get you 25 million shoppers in terms of the weighted catchment. But if we wanted to pursue 25 million shoppers in Poland, naturally that's a greater proportion of the overall population. So you actually have to drill further down that retail market classification. So all of a sudden you'll have a far more fragmented store estate if you're trying to pursue the same level of growth or pursue the same number of shoppers as this example illustrates, because all of a sudden you need a format and a proposition that's going to work for you in a small market, in a small provincial market, in a small rural market, in a district centre, in a factory outlet type location. So clearly there are differences that need to be considered when you're looking to pursue growth across Europe and when you're looking at Europe as a single market. So in our limited time today, I mean, we've really just scratched the surface in terms of what retail markets offers as a mechanism of understanding the retail landscape across Europe in a consistent analytical framework. And we've seen today how we can identify those gateway cities, which most people could identify off the top of their head. Anyone with enough industrial knowledge or probably an atlas would be able to do that. But actually quantifying the opportunity and then benchmarking and prioritizing is where it gets far more interesting with those gateway cities. And as I say, when you're looking to then pursue those second tier locations, your strategy in a more mature market needs to be very different from your strategy in a maturing market, because those opportunities just aren't there in some of those locations. So hopefully that's given you a flavor of the types of things that you need to be thinking about. And of course, we've clearly seen that you can't have a same proposition or same format across the whole of Europe, because that just won't work, especially if you want to get that depth. If you want to get the breadth, just chasing the gateway cities, of course, then it's relatively straightforward. But once you want to move down from those gateway cities into those tier 2 locations, it becomes far more consuming in terms of the amount of effort and thought and strategy that needs to be put in place in order to pursue that growth. Now, as I mentioned today, really, in the short time that we've had, I've only been able to scratch the surface in terms of what we can cover in terms of talking about these 5 questions and pursuing growth across Europe. We will be providing a slightly more detailed white paper, so that will be made available to the attendees, and you can download that and then get a slightly more detailed view of the things that I've really just touched on today. So I guess over the next 15 minutes or so, we'll take some questions answer those questions that are valid to the wider group. If there's specific questions, maybe we'll take them offline and respond to you via email. But if you're sticking around for questions, that's great. Otherwise, thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon.